Okay, now we are going to embark on a journey that will lead us to an appreciation of the diverse Asian cultures that, on the one hand, originated outside of the orbits of China and India, yet on the other hand, were heavily influenced by the imperialist tentacles of either one or both. And as you are learning from the textbook and in my previous presentation on Japan, Korea was the mediating influence between China and Japan. In fact, to my understanding, Japan owes its foundational heritage to Korea. Korea had advanced society several hundred years before the Japanese organized under Yamato rule. And meanwhile, to the south, independent political organizations arose on the mainland and the archipelagos or island chains in the Pacific. After World War II, historians began identifying the area as Southeast Asia, denoting an enormous and varied area containing mountain ranges, fertile valleys, and rainforests, and occupied by a diverse mixture of races, cultures, and religions. Myanmar or Burma, in the northwest portion of the southeast mainland, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, in the southern portion of the southeast mainland, and Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines, constituting the island chains. Now, Korea has been inhabited since Neolithic times, but because it was strongly affected by its proximity to China, many times it is referred to as the little brother of China. Yet the people emerged independently from the mountainous peninsula thousands of years before the Common Era. Now, the first recognizable political state was Gojoseon. Relations between Korea and China go back to mythology. One historian, recounting the Samguk Yusa, or the memorabilia of the Three Kingdoms that was written in the 13th century, traces the founding of Gojoseon to 2333 BCE by Dangun Wagyeom, or Tangun, the offspring of the divine Hwanung and a female bear that was transformed into a woman. This myth symbolizes the arrival of bronze. Dangun was born on the third day of the 10th month, and so today, the 3rd of October, is celebrated as National Foundation Day in South Korea. Now, Chinese culture was likely brought to Korea by refugees fleeing the 4th century BCE conflicts of the Warring States period. A Chinese sage named Jisi and 5,000 followers left China and settled in Dangun's kingdom. When Dangun retreated to a mountaintop to meditate, Jisi was made king. And despite the myth, by the 2nd century BCE, Gojoseon collapsed and its successor states were no match for the Han dynasty. Now, the Han were primarily interested in Korea's natural resources, especially salt and iron. The Han divided Korea into administrative units. Gojoseon's territories would later become Koryo in the north, Koguryo in the north, with the southern part split into the three states of Baekje or Paekje, Gaya or Kaya, and Silla in the subsequent Three Kingdoms period. The four states of the Three Kingdoms period, between 57 of BCE and 668 of the Common Era, were in constant rivalry, and they formed ever-changing alliances one with another, but ultimately they came under the rule of the powerful Tang dynasty. Koguryo, with its capital at Pyongyang, prospered in the 5th century of the Common Era, dominating northern Korea, most of Manchuria, and a portion of Inner Mongolia. Silla, meanwhile, with its capital at Gyeongju, flourished through centralized administrative systems, prospering on the eastern coast due to agricultural innovations such as oxen-drawn plows and irrigation systems. Silla overcame resistance efforts from Gaya and Baekje, continuing a system of division of power between king and local lords. Now, the system of government of the Three Kingdoms mirrored Confucian ethics. One historian describes the rule that would remain for the rest of the history of ancient Korea. A monarch ruled with the aid of senior administrative officials drawn from a landed aristocracy. Government-appointed officials administered the provinces with the aid of local tribal leaders. And the majority of the population were landed peasantry, and the state extracted a tax from them which was usually payable in kind. The state could also oblige citizens to fight in the army or work on government projects such as building fortifications. At the very bottom of the social ladder were slaves, typically prisoners of wars or those in serious debt, and criminals who were forced to work on the estates of the aristocracy. Now, there is a fascinating history of infighting between the Korean states, at times settled by outside intervention from China. In some years, troublesome peoples in the ruling elites of the former kingdoms were forcibly relocated. In other years, village headmen were compelled to send their eldest sons to work in the capital administration or military. Most often, the rigidity of its class structure led to frustration, as a strict social classification of entitlements and obligations denied people opportunities to rise above the class of one's birth. With stagnation of ideas and innovations, the aristocracy resented the power of the king as the peasantry grew more and more resentful of the incessant taxes levied upon them. And then on top of that, local landed aristocrats became ever more difficult to control from the capital. Now, as the state was falling apart from within, an able military general and administrative ruler named Wang Khan, or Wang Zhan, in 918 of the Common Era, began the unification of the country, and by 935 of the Common Era, established the Goryeo, or Goryeo dynasty. Now, the Goryeo would rule Korea for over 400 years to 1392, and it is the name of this kingdom which is the origin of the English name for the peninsula, Korea. Wang Zhan selected the northern city of Songdo, modern Gaesong, as his new capital and declared himself king. And for his contribution to creating the new state, he was given the posthumous title King Taejo, or Great Founder. And from then on, the kingdom flourished. Korea minted its own coinage, produced silver vases, invented movable metal-type printing. Confucian principles were followed in the state administration, and Buddhism was established as the official religion. With prosperity came an increasing decadence among the ruling elite, with corruption and social unrest following. Open rebellions broke out in 1126 and 1135 of the Common Era, which were ultimately quashed. But matters only became worse as coups, assassinations, and slave rebellions plagued the century. Worse was to come when the Mongols invaded in 1231. The ruling elite abandoned the country by moving the capital to Ganghwa Island, leaving the rest of the Goryeo population to face 6 Mongol invasions over the next 3 decades. And by 1258 of the Common Era, the people had had enough and the military ruler was assassinated, the king reinstalled with full powers, and peace made with the Mongols. Korea would not be independent again until the general Yi Seong-ji formed a new state of Joseon in 1392 of the Common Era. Now, it is difficult to make generalizations about society and social structure in Southeast Asia because of the great variety of states, of races, and its ethnic diversity. The 2 geographic portions of the area, the mainland and the archipelagos or island chains, reveal contrasting origins. The mainland contains people who are descended from speakers of the Sino-Tibetan or the Sino-Tibetan language group, while the island peoples speak Austronesian languages with Chinese and Indian admixtures. Archaeology reveals Neolithic origins dating to the 5th millennium BCE. And the textbook shares that Imperial China and India influenced the region in many different spheres. So while China's influence was founded on military and diplomatic supremacy, India's stamp was trade, culture, and philosophy. And the dividing line between Chinese and Indian impact was central Vietnam. Now, what is found in common in most of the states were the hereditary aristocrats who held political and economic power. And these urban-centered elites garnered the loyalties of various sectors of society: merchants, artisans, rice farmers, subsistence farmers, and the poor. While women did not hold high rank, they did have more rights than their counterparts in China and India. So the first mainland centers of trade are known as Funan and Champa. Now, Funan was the first large Southeast Asian civilization. It was centered on the lower Mekong Delta in present-day Cambodia and Vietnam and stretched into Thailand and possibly Malaysia. Funan lasted from AD the 1st century to 7th century. Funan is a Chinese name, and it may be a transliteration of the ancient Khmer word Banam, meaning mountain. Funan, the earliest of the Indianized states in Southeast Asia, generally is considered by Cambodians to have been the first Khmer kingdom in the area. And as a historian of the Asian Society writes, the Funan culture flourished in the Mekong River Delta in southern Vietnam and was a center of Southeast Asian trade between the 1st and 5th centuries. This period saw an increase in international trade from the Mediterranean to China. Westerners sought the gold of the East, and with the development of more advanced sailing ships that harnessed the power of the monsoon winds, transoceanic travel became possible. Now, few details are known about the Funan people. However, it is evident that they were a technically advanced seafaring people with the means to participate in trade on a large scale. A 3rd century source describes their ships as 200 feet long and able to carry 700 men and an extensive cargo. Studies on the Funan reveal that during the 1st century AD, when Rome ruled the Mediterranean, the Funanese traded widely, establishing a wonderful tradition of Hindu-influenced art and architecture, and became skilled goldsmiths and jewelers. They also built an irrigation system that was impressive by today's standards and used an extensive network of canals for both transportation and agriculture. Funan was essentially an Indian civilization set in Southeast Asia. It was ruled by Hindu rulers and influenced by the culture of the Indian Pallava kingdom. It absorbed Indian concepts of jurisprudence, astronomy, literature, and universal kingship. The Sanskrit language was used in Funan courts. It gave birth to the first writing system and inscriptions used in Southeast Asia. The area was a natural region for the development of an economy based on fishing and rice cultivation. And there is considerable evidence that the Funanese economy depended on rice surpluses produced by an extensive inland irrigation system. Maritime trade also played an extremely important role in the development of the Funan. But in the 6th and 7th centuries, the Funan was weakened by civil wars, and it was absorbed by the pre-Khmer civilization of Chenla. Meanwhile, historical studies revealed the Hindu kingdom of Champa emerging around present-day Da Nang in the late AD 2nd century. Like Funan, it adopted Sanskrit as a sacred language and borrowed heavily from Indian art and culture. And by the 8th century, Champa had expanded southward to include what is now Nha Trang and Phan Rang. For centuries, the people developed a reputation as a race of warriors and pirates, defending their vast and prosperous lands from numerous invasions. However, in 1471, the empire finally collapsed before Vietnamese invaders. Only the grandiose temples and sanctuaries, irrigation systems, sculpture, woven cloth, and jewelry remain as evidence of this one great civilization. The Champa Empire flourished in central Vietnam for more than 1,000 years before it was defeated in the 15th century by northern Vietnamese. As Arab merchants stopped along the Vietnamese coast en route to China, Islam began to infiltrate the civilization, and Hinduism soon became associated with the upper classes. So between the rise of the Khmer Empire around the year 800 and Vietnam's territorial push to the south, the Champa kingdom began to diminish. Which brings us to present-day Cambodia, or the ancestors of present-day Cambodians. The Khmer conquered the Funan and politically dominated the region for several hundred years. Centering their government on the city of Angkor, Kampuchea became a magnificent mainland empire. It was the capital of a civilization which had achieved an enormous technical revolution in agriculture and irrigation. And on the basis of these developments, was able to construct a highly advanced culture. The Khmer, who now populate Cambodia, may have migrated from southeastern China to the Indo-Chinese peninsula before the 1st century AD. They settled in the region before their present Vietnamese, Thai, and Lao neighbors. Now, according to historians, the ancestors of the early Khmer are believed to have arrived in the Angkor area between 5,000 and 10,000 years ago. They were attracted by the good fishing and plentiful water supplies offered by Tonle Sap, which is an inundated freshwater lake and an attached river. The Khmer people were among the first in Southeast Asia to adopt religious ideas and political institutions from India and to establish centralized kingdoms encompassing large territories. Cambodia came into being, so legend has it, through the union of a princess and a foreigner. The foreigner was an Indian Brahmin named Kaundinya, and the princess was a daughter of a dragon king who ruled over a watery land. Despite its mythical beginnings, Cambodia's religious, royal, and written traditions stemmed from India and began to coalesce as a cultural unity in their own right between the 1st and 5th centuries. The first contacts between the people of Southeast Asia and the empires of India and China are believed to have taken place between 50 BC and AD 100. Chinese and Christian traders are believed to have arrived in Southeast Asia while searching for a maritime Silk Road route to replace overland routes blocked by horseman tribes in Central Asia. Cambodian kingdoms owed much to Indian culture, which provided alphabets, art forms, architectural styles, religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, and a stratified class system. Local beliefs that stressed the importance of ancestral spirits coexisted with Indian religions, and they remain powerful today. The golden age of Khmer civilization, however, was the period from the 9th to the 13th century when the kingdom of Kambuja, which gave Kampuchea or Cambodia its name, ruled large territories from its capital in the region of Angkor in western Cambodia. While Kampuchea began as a Hindu monarchy, Hindu belief was replaced by Theravada Buddhism in the 12th and 13th century, with its emphasis on equality of men and rejection of monarchic divinity. Jayavarman II, the most powerful ruler of the kingdom of Angkor, consolidated power and set up a capital at Angkor Thom, naming his kingdom the Khmer, and crowning himself God King. Under Jayavarman VII, who ruled between 1181 and 1218 of the Common Era, Kampuchea reached its zenith of power and cultural creativity. And it was following his death that Kampuchea experienced gradual decline. And there are many factors that were involved in the decline. The important factors were the aggressiveness of neighboring peoples, especially the Thai or Siamese. It was chronic political strife and the gradual deterioration of the complex irrigation system that had ensured rice surpluses. The Angkorian monarchy survived until 1431, when the Thai captured Angkor Thom and the Cambodian king fled to the south. Now we turn to the maritime empires of the island chains, Srivijaya and Majapahit. Let me say it again. Srivijaya and Majapahit. I hope I'm doing justice to these terms. Now, with the fall of the Funan and Champa trading networks, Srivijaya gradually forced itself into the opening in intra-Asian trade. And between the 7th and the 13th centuries, Srivijaya became a maritime and commercial kingdom that flourished largely in what is now known as Indonesia. And with the origins on the island of Sumatra, Srivijaya extended its influence once it controlled the Strait of Malacca. Srivijaya's power rested on control of international sea trade. It established trade relations not only with the states in the Malay archipelago, but also with China and India. And by the year 1000, it controlled most of Java. But it soon lost it to Chola an Indian maritime and commercial kingdom. Srivijaya, with continued Chinese support, managed to be an obstacle to India on the sea route between South and East Asia. But once Chinese recognition was withdrawn, the empire disappeared. It was the rulers of a centralized state society in eastern Java that delivered the final blows to Srivijaya. Majapahit sovereigns created the only native empire to unify all of present-day Indonesia. Indonesia's national hero, Gajah Mada, supervised the conquest of the entire archipelago. Now, according to historians, the Majapahit kingdom, which ruled between 1293 to 1520, was perhaps the greatest of the early Indonesian kingdoms. It was founded in 1294 in East Java by a man named Wijaya, who defeated invading Mongols. And under the ruler Hayam Wuruk, between 1350 and 1389, and the military leader Gajah Mada, it expanded across Java and gained control over much of present-day Indonesia. Large parts of Java, Sumatra, Sulawesi, Borneo, Lombok, Maluku, Sumbawa, Timor, and the other scattered islands, as well as the Malay Peninsula, was taken over through military might. Places of commercial value, such as ports, were targeted, and the wealth gained from trade enriched the empire. The name Majapahit stems from two words, Maja, meaning the type of fruit, and Pahit, which is the Indonesian word for bitter. So this bitter fruit kingdom was an Indianized kingdom. It was the last of the major Hindu empires of the Malay archipelago, and it is considered one of the greatest states in Indonesian history. Majapahit, was based on the combined development of agriculture and large-scale maritime trade. Now, local wealth came from extensive wet rice cultivation, and international wealth came from the spice trade. Now, Hinduism fused with Buddhism and became the primary religion. Islam was tolerated, and there is evidence that Muslims worked within the court. Javanese kings ruled in accordance with Wahyu, the belief that some people had a divine mandate to rule. And people believed if a king misruled the people, then the people had to go down with him. Although the Majapahit rulers extended their power over other islands and destroyed neighboring kingdoms, their focus was on controlling and gaining a larger share of the commercial trade that passed through the archipelago. About the time Majapahit was founded, Muslim traders and proselytizers began entering the area. Muslim merchants from Gujarat, India, and Persia began visiting in the 13th century and established trade links between the area and India and Persia. Along with trade, they propagated Islam among the Indonesian people, particularly along the coastal areas of Java, specifically in a city-state named Demak. At a later stage, they even influenced and converted Hindu kings to Islam, the first being the Sultan of Demak. Demise of the empire occurred when an agricultural crisis led to civil wars of succession, coupled with the appearance of strong trading rivals. An Islamic state formed around a trading center known as Malacca at the beginning of the 15th century. Malacca developed into a major trading port that expanded and converted a majority of its people in the areas it controlled to Islam. Soon, restive vassal rulers eager for independence all challenged the political economic order from which Majapahit had drawn much of its legitimacy. And the system collapsed in 1478, opening the way to Muslim conquest of Java. Now we go back to the mainland and concentrate on an area in the northwest, home to two important societies, Burma, or modern-day Myanmar, on the west, and Siam, or modern-day Thailand, on the east. Now, the people of Burma originated from the valleys of the Salween and Irrawaddy rivers just south of the plateau of Tibet. They migrated to the highlands of Tibet during the 7th century, and by the 11th century created their first centralized marketing system, their first state, the Kingdom of Pagan. Meanwhile, the Thai people emerged along the southern border of China in the 6th century, and the 11th and 12th centuries migrated southward, coming into conflict with the Khmer Empire. The Kingdom of Thailand was established at Ayutthaya. Let me see if I can pronounce that again. Ayutthaya, on the Chao Phraya River. Now, both societies were influenced by China and India. And the Burmese were originally Hindu, but gradually the governing class adopted Hinayana Buddhism that was brought to them from Sri Lanka monasteries. Thailand likewise adopted Hinayana Buddhism as its state religion. Now, the Kingdom of Pagan emerged as an economically vital agricultural center, eventually developing into a regional sea trading empire. Its decline was hastened by Mongolian invaders in the 13th century. So with the decline of Pagan and the Burma kingship system, Thailand then steps in and takes advantage by filling in gaps in trade. They were likewise overwhelmed militarily by the Mongols, but instead of being destroyed like Burma, they became tributaries. Thai power was linked to this favoritism. The Thai kings of Chakri dynasty adopted the Hinayana Buddhism, introduced a model land tenure system, created an advanced and efficient code of law, and standardized the language in both written and oral forms. Thailand became the successor through conquest of Kampuchea in the 14th and 15th centuries. And finally, we deal with the people of Vietnam. And much like the people of Korea, they were brought under the rule of China around 111 BCE. And for 1,000 years, the Vietnamese developed a love-hate relationship with China. The name Vietnam, which is a Vietnamese pronunciation, is a variation of Nam Viet, which is a Chinese pronunciation meaning Southern Viet, with Viet being a word applied to the group of peoples in the 2nd century BCE then living in southern China and Vietnam. The legendary Hong Bong dynasty of the Hung Kings is considered the first Vietnamese state, known in the Vietnamese as Van Lang. In 257 BCE, the last Hung king was defeated by Thuc Pan, who consolidated the Lac Viet and the Ao Viet tribes to form the Ao Loc, proclaiming himself An Duong Vuong. In 207 BCE, a Chinese general named Zhou Tuo defeated An Duong Vuong and consolidated Ao Loc into a new name known as Nan Yue. However, Nan Yue was itself incorporated into the empire of the Chinese Han Dynasty in 111 BCE after the infamous Han-Nan Yue War. So for the next 1,000 years, Vietnam remained mostly under Chinese rule, with independence movements gaining temporary success throughout. The most famous resistance leaders were women, the Trung sisters and Lady Trieu. In 39 of the Common Era, Trung Trc and Trung Ni led an armed rebellion that challenged Chinese rule for 2 years before being crushed. The sisters committed joint suicide and became national symbols of anti-Chinese partisanship. But the most famous resistance leader is Zhu Tijin, or Lady Zhu, who was orphaned as a toddler and lived with her brother. And tired of Chinese oppression and exploitation, she fled to the countryside, set up an army base, and trained 1,000 rebels to fight against the Chinese. Now, according to one report, when her brother tried to discourage her, Zhu famously said, "I will not resign myself to the lot of women who bow their heads and become concubines. I wish to ride the tempest, tame the waves, kill the sharks. I have no desire to take abuse." Zhu Tijin became legendary. Before the age of 21, Lady Zhu successfully fought over 30 battles against the Chinese with her rebel army. And according to legend, she was over 9 feet tall, with a voice which sounded like a temple bell, and rode into battle on an elephant, wearing golden armor and carrying a sword in each hand. The Chinese were said to be afraid of her fierce gaze and said it would be easier to fight a tiger than to face Lady Ju in battle. In 248 of the Common Era, the Chinese finally defeated her. And she despaired so much at the loss that she committed suicide by throwing herself into a river. But it was not until 938 of the Common Era when the Vietnamese lord Ngo Quyen defeated the forces of the Chinese Southern Han state at Bac Dang River that the people will regain full independence. In 939, after a millennium of Chinese domination, the nation will rename itself Dai Viet, or Great Viet, and usher in a golden era under 2 dynasties, the Li and the Tran, establishing centralized rule in a city they named Hanoi. The Dai Viet forced the Mongol conquerors of China to accept their right to exist after repelling 3 Mongol invasions during the rule of the Tang dynasty. In all, Vietnam emulated Confucian values and practice without surrendering in its insistence on political sovereignty. And meanwhile, Buddhism flourished and became the state religion. So Vietnamese independence was briefly interrupted by the Chinese Ming dynasty, but it was restored by Le Loi, the founder of the Li dynasty. Vietnam reached its zenith under the Li dynasty in the 15th century. And from there, everybody wanted Mo Pho. So Vietnam is important to appreciate. They have been resilient. They have fought invasions and occupations of their territory. They are very well rehearsed in resistance, and they have a great country. So please, let's watch the documentary video that concludes this presentation.